You're listening to Behind the Masterpiece. I'm your host, Brian Hirsch, CEO of Arts and Cultural Alliance of Sarasota County. Today with us, we'll be hearing from Richard Russell, the General Director of the Sarasota Opera and also the Chair of Visit Sarasota County. So we'll be learning about arts and culture and maybe even a little bit of tourism here in Sarasota. Richard, welcome to Behind the Masterpiece.
Thank you, Brian. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you. We're really excited. So Richard, let's jump in. Love opera, been to opera many times of myself. Not everyone has. So we're going to learn a lot about that today. But you are the general director for the Sarasota Opera, but I'm pretty sure that wasn't your first role at the Sarasota Opera. Tell us what was.
No, it's been a long path. So my first connection with the company was way back 35 years ago, 1989. I was hired to be an apprentice artist. I was a singer. I was pursuing a career as a professional opera singer. And I was hired to be part of the chorus, to be part of the emerging artist program that we have here at Sarasota Opera. So it was not my first job, my first professional job, but it was one of my first jobs in opera. And that led to a long-standing relationship with the company. I was hired back for 3 additional seasons in different roles. I was a studio artist, which is the next level up in our training programs. And then I was a principal artist, so hired as a principal to do a specific role in the operas. I then had a career sidetrack and worked in banking for 12 years. I worked for Citigroup and then came back in 2005 as the marketing director and at Sarasota Opera, and was here in that role for 5 years. Went to another opera company in Princeton, New Jersey for 2 years as the general director, and was brought back to Sarasota Opera in 2012 as first executive director. And then my title changed to general director a couple of years ago.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. It seems like you have a long history and connection with Sarasota and the Sarasota Opera, which is really exciting. And opera is really an outstanding art form as well. But I know to some it can seem esoteric, or maybe people could be intimidated by it. So tell us, what drew you originally to opera, and help us demystify opera for those who might be less aware.
Well, I, had the benefit of great education. I grew up just outside of New York City. I had a music teacher when I was in the 5th grade who loved opera and had a module in which she introduced us to the opera Carmen. She played us recordings, told us the story, showed us visuals. Back in those days, they had these things called film strips. And they were just visual pictures of a production at the Metropolitan Opera. And then we went on a backstage tour of the Met. We went up to Lincoln Center, and it just intrigued me. I loved the music. I loved the spectacle of the stage, seeing all of those people's chorus. Just the whole story was compelling to me. So I convinced my mother to take me to an opera. It was Carmen again at the New York City Opera. And that began a lifelong passion. And I have, I always loved performing. I always loved being on stage, even as a young child. I always a bit of a ham. But I realized when I got older and my voice began to develop that was something I wanted to do, was to perform opera. So, people I think they're intimidated by a few factors of the opera. I think one is the language barrier for Americans and non-Italian and French speakers and German speakers, which has been largely overcome since the super titles were introduced in the late 1980s. We actually at Sarasota Opera were one of the first companies in the country to begin using those on a regular basis. So that has the English translation running simultaneously with the original text as it's being performed. So that's one of the barriers broken. The other is, I think, a perception, I think it's a false perception, that it is for elite, super educated, people with great means. Opera has always been a very popular entertainment. When it was first introduced in the late 1500s, it was the province of the aristocracy. But shortly after, the first public opera houses were introduced in Venice and then all through Italy. And it became the place where people met and they got together and they talked. And, I always love to joke about the fact that Gioacchino Rossini, a great composer, wrote The Barber of Seville. When he was the music director of the Teatro San Carlo in Naples, a great opera house, that one of the things that was a part of his salary was he got a take from the gaming tables in the lobby. That people went there. That was their entertainment. They would go, they would meet their friends, they would go to the opera, they would talk. And, and I think that's one of the great things about the experience of going to a live performance is you get to be with people. You get to communicate, share your thoughts about the opera or what else is going on in your life. Have a drink before, during intermission. It's a great social experience. And I think we need to convey that more to people, that it should not be intimidating in any way.
Not intimidating at all. Last season as I went, I just laughed and laughed. I had such a great time. The comic timing of the production was unbelievable. So I think, and again, being in a shared space, we know arts builds community. So really important stuff. So Sarasota Opera doing great work. And yes, it's for everyone, but Sarasota Opera does stand out. So tell us a little bit about, what's the aesthetic or how would you define Sarasota Operas, how you produce the art form, especially when you look at it across the state, across the country, or across the world?
Sure. Well, we're uniquely dedicated at this time to producing opera as the creators intended it. A lot of opera companies are being more interpretive in the way that they produce opera. They're modernizing pieces. They are using a director's vision to try to convey a story, maybe put a different twist on it. And we don't do that, and for a number of reasons. I mean, I believe very firmly in that these are great pieces. There's great music. There are really interesting stories. As long as you put it in historical context, you realize that it's not the same story you might see in a movie today. But nevertheless, if you look at it as a wonderful historic story, and if you produce it in a way that's true to the works as they were originally written, to the text as it's written, and to the music, these pieces are it, you can't take one element of it and take it aside and say that's not important. That is, it's all important. They work together because the music, it describes the text, it interprets the text. And so we try to be faithful to the way that the creators, the composer, the librettist, intended the operas. And I have to say that's true. Many of the works we do are historic pieces, are romantic pieces from the 19th century, early 20th century, but we have and will do 20th century operas, and we take that same approach. We have had composers here who we have done their works. Carlisle Floyd with his Of Mice and Men, Robert Ward with his The Crucible, and we have respected their vision, and both of those composers have said that our productions of their works are some of the best that they've ever seen. So I think it's really important that that's right for us, first of all. I don't want to denigrate those more interpretive kinds of productions that I see around the country, but I think it's right for our audience, and it's right, I think, for our company. So that's why we maintain that way.
Excellent. No, I hear a lot of great things. I think one thing really important, great works stand the test of time. So I think that's clearly demonstrated by what the Sarasota Opera is doing. I think another thing I heard for our listeners was to see something of the best. You can see something of the best in class at Sarasota Opera. So how exciting is that as well? I'm with Richard Russell, the General Director of the Sarasota Opera. So listen, it's October. The season is around the corner. What are you excited to share about this upcoming season? You're very intentional of how you program things, as you've just demonstrated for us. What's exciting as we look ahead this season?
Well, gosh, I think there's so much that's exciting. First of all, in this community, because things are a little bit of a lull during the summer, I'm excited to see the people again. I'm excited to be among our audience in the Opera House, enjoying the pieces, we also have lots of social events and so opportunities to engage with our audience. I'm excited to meet new people who come through our door for the first time. Um, but I really think we have some wonderful programming going on. I just got wonderful news from our education department. We do a youth opera production, which is of a work that's written for young people to sing. And this year we're doing a version of The Hobbit by a Canadian composer named Dean Bury. It's a piece we've done several times before. It's always been a great favorite amongst our youth opera. And I was talking with our education department yesterday, and they asked me to guess how many people had signed up to be part of it. Now, we went through a big lull during COVID. We've lost a lot of our participants, and it's taken a few years to build back. So my guess was, about 70. Well, we're already at 78. And that means that we'll probably have another 10 to 15 sign up between now and when we start rehearsals for that in a couple of weeks. So I'm very excited that we're back to full strength for our Sarasota Youth Opera. So that's going to be great because I just love, and we have so many new young people part of the program that getting them excited about opera, participating in this particular work, I think is very exciting. We have a wonderful concert planned for November of the works of Giuseppe Verdi. As I'm sure, Brian, you know, and many of our listeners will know, we are the company that has performed all of the works of Giuseppe Verdi and the only company in the world, and that includes companies in Italy. We are the only company to have done all of his works. So we are revisiting some of the favorites in a concert with our great partners, the Sarasota Orchestra, Maestro Dorenzi, Victor Dorenzi, our artistic director for the last 43 seasons, will be conducting, and some wonderful soloists. And then we get into our winter festival, which has 4 works. I can't tell you which one I'm more excited about because I love them all. I think they're all wonderful pieces, a double bill of Cavaliere Rusticana and Pagliacci, both very, very dramatic and exciting works with great, great music, iconic music. The Clown's aria Vesti la giubba in Pagliacci, which was a Rice Krispies commercial when I was a kid. So it was, that's an important work in the repertoire. The hilarity of The Barber of Seville, the sequel to The Barber of Seville, The Marriage of Figaro, which is, it's rare to see them both in the same season, but it just kind of worked for us this year to see those 2 works, which are masterpieces, one by Rossini, the other by Mozart. No greater composer ever wrote than Mozart. And then a rare work by Verdi, that it has a really interesting story because it was lost for a number of years. It was premiered. It was not a success, not because it wasn't a good piece, but it was censored. It was about a religious story, and the authorities in the town that it was originally premiered didn't want religious subjects portrayed on stage. So they censored it, and it was not successful, according to Verdi, because of that. So he withdrew it. And the score was lost for many years, and it was only reconstructed in the 1970s. And it is really a significant work by Verdi, some really beautiful music. And so it's an opportunity to find this, rare piece along with some really, really popular pieces. So I think it's going to be an exciting season.
Exciting indeed. I always love seeing something that's a new experience. So just when something of that nature and Verdi hey, we know Verdi, but it's still new. I always love something like that. That's amazing. Now, Richard, you've talked about, how amazing things are, of course, at the Sarasota Opera and on the stage, and why we want people to come here. But something you and I didn't talk about yet, but I know that there's an essence of Sarasota Opera that we can often find on other stages. You have a pretty savvy business sense at the Sarasota Opera. What sort of elements are we seeing that appear on other stages, maybe across the country, from the Sarasota Opera?
Well, we were very lucky to have the opportunity a couple of years back in 2019 to purchase a costume collection that was owned by a company called Malabar in Toronto. And the owner, with whom we had a really long business relationship, both ourselves, the company, and also our costume designer, Howard Kaplan. And he had decided he wanted to retire. And he approached us because he knew, again, because of our aesthetic, he knew that we would protect his legacy. He had other people who are interested in these costumes. One big costume, store in Canada who wanted to take them, and I keep referring to it as strip them for parts, turn them into Halloween costumes, and and he wanted that legacy protected, so he offered us a very good price, or he gave us a very good price for the costumes. We purchased them, so now we have about 100,000 costumes that we rent to not only other opera companies, but also theater companies, universities, and also we've developed a niche film business. So there is I think I can say this publicly, but there is a series called Elsbeth that has an opera sequence in it, and they're going to have some of our costumes. There's been Netflix things. There was a Kia car commercial that had some of our costumes in it. So we've been very lucky to parlay this, especially because unfortunately the timing of this purchase was horrible. We bought it right before COVID when everything shut down. So we've been able to continue and build this business, which provides us with income. It provides an ability for us to contain our costs for producing opera by having our own costume stock. And then it spreads the Sarasota Opera name throughout the country because we are now becoming known as the leading rental place for opera costumes.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing. This is Richard Russell, General Director of the Sarasota Opera, on Behind the Masterpiece. I think that's a very appropriate Behind the Masterpiece sort of narrative. And I think, Richard, you're very much demonstrating the economic impact that, of course, our arts and culture sector has in Sarasota County and really beyond. But this is a great example of that. I happen to know you are also the chair of Visit Sarasota County. So can you tell us a little bit more about what role arts and culture really does play in driving tourism for Sarasota County?
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognize we have an extraordinary community for the performing arts and the visual arts. There is not I venture to say, there's not a community like it in the country, certainly not in Florida, that has this kind of quantity and quality of all of the arts. The wonderful Ringling Museum, our great theaters, the orchestra, the ballet, which just came back from London. I mean, the quality of what we have to offer here in Sarasota is extraordinary. And it does draw people, both as a visitor and as a resident, to this area. People intentionally come here because they want to experience the arts. So I am firmly committed as being part of Visit Sarasota County because they are our tourism marketing agency. They are the ones who help get that word out. And they are doing that. They're helping us get that word out of what we have to offer in this community. It really is, we have a quarter of our audience are visitors. I know our other arts organizations have lots of people, and I know that we have people who intentionally come. We have what we call opera lovers weeks, where you can come and see 4 operas in 3 days if you're an opera junkie. And they do. We have lots of people. When you come in the last couple of weeks of our season and you sit down next to somebody in the Sarasota Opera House, it's not uncommon. You'll be sitting next to somebody from Los Angeles, Boston, Chicago, many cities in the U.S. We have people who come regularly from the U.K., from Germany to visit our opera company. So, that's an important part of the fabric of this community. And I think, there are lots of communities in Florida that have beaches, but I don't know of any that have this wonderful beaches. And then when you get off the beach in the day, you can go to a great performance in the evening. And I hear time and time again that people move here because of the opera. And it's really interesting. There was a survey done last year, I think, by Downs and St. Germain, that reported that there are lots of people who come to Sarasota for the first time and don't know about our arts community. But once they learn about it, that's one of the reasons they come back. And I think that's a very important thing to let people aware of.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Richard. Yes, Sarasota, an amazing place where you can go to the beach during the day, one of our many beautiful beaches, but not only in a short period of time could you see all of these amazing different operas. To Richard's point, you can experience many of our different arts and cultural venues, spaces, performances, exhibitions as well. So a lot to pack in here for those outside of Sarasota listening to this. You can pack a lot in a short period of time. So Richard, I'm going to leave you with this question a little bit outside of arts and culture, maybe alluding to some of those other aspects. So you live here, you've been here for quite some time, especially when we look at collectively. What are you doing to relax or rejuvenate outside of the world of arts and culture that's here in Sarasota County? What keeps you charged up and relaxed?
Well, first of all, I love our arts and culture. Not only do I love the opera, I love all of our arts organizations, so I go there on a regular basis. I also love our weather. I'm not I wouldn't necessarily say an outdoorsy person, but I like to jog. So it's a little hard in the summer, but in the rest of the year, I like to be out there. I like to enjoy the many outdoor amenities we have here in Sarasota. I like the beach. I like sometimes just, floating in my pool, reading a book and listening to music. But, there's also, I'm a foodie, so I love our restaurants. There's so many things to do in this community, and I love to partake in all. I love the times when I can be a tourist in Sarasota, because I can experience this summer. I can tell you, I've been to the Ringling, I've been to Selby. I sometimes venture on the other side of the bridge. Don't tell people, but go up to St. Pete and visit there. I like to experience all we have here.
Thanks for sharing, Richard. Richard Russell, General Director of the Sarasota Opera. A lot to do and experience at the Sarasota Opera. A lot to do and experience in Sarasota County. An amazing place. Behind the Masterpiece. Richard Russell, thank you for being on Behind the Masterpiece today.
It's a great pleasure, always.
Awesome to have you. Be well, and everyone go out there and experience the Sarasota Opera. Thanks for joining us on Behind the Masterpiece. We'll catch you later. Thanks for listening to this episode of Behind the Masterpiece, brought to you by Visit Sarasota County. For more and to hear this podcast, go to visitsarasota.com.